Today we'll be traveling to the East, home of gunpowder, bushido, and anime. We'll live a day in the life of a Japanese samurai and dispel a few stereotypes. We'll learn about their lives and, of course, we'll take apart the movie 47 Ronin with Keanu Reeves. Meet our samurai Shintsu. It's 1610 and Shintsu is the most ordinary of the 400,000 or so samurai of that era. He serves his daimyo near Hischi Castle, in Higyo Prefecture. Shintsu's task is as simple as 3 pennies. He guards the Lord's castle, for which in Europe he would long ago have received the title of Ordinary Guardian. But we are in Japan, and here Shintsu is a samurai. Let and prenadle zadnogo to the lowest caste. A little higher stands daimyo, still the same samurai but managing both the castle and a small adjacent city. The daimyo has 100 to a couple thousand samurai like Shintsu at his disposal. In turn, the daimyo, as well as hundreds of others like him, unquestioningly obey the shogun, the chief samurai and ruler of Japan. At the moment, this is the legendary Ieyasu Tokugawa, who put an end to feudal wars and gathered all the power in his hands. There were a bunch of intermediate classes like bannermen, vassals, and baishin, but we will not dwell on them in detail and take a simplified scheme as an example. On Shintsu, light armor and a bow. After all, damage to the prevailing prejudice is not all samurai wore plate armor and 2 swords. This is the domain of swordsmen, but there were both regular and mounted archers along with infantry. Samurai art of archery lives in Japan until now, and many competitions are held on it. It is called kujutsu, and up to the 16th century stood even above the skill of sword skills. But of course the traditional katana in Shintsu also has to be exact 2 at once. The samurai as a privileged class carried 2 swords. The familiar katana was accompanied by a small wakizashi blade, usually worn in the belt. Even when Shogun Tokugawa banned the public carrying of weapons, samurai could still carry 2 swords wherever they wanted. As you may have already realized, all power is actually concentrated in the hands of samurai, and if you thought that they were the dominant caste in Japan of those times, it is absolutely true. Officially, ruler Tokugawa divided the country into 4 estates of samurai, peasants, artisans, and merchants. But in the same decree, black and white prescribed the exclusive role of samurai standing above the rest. The main thing in which it was expressed was the so-called right to kill and leave. Any samurai from the shogun to our guard Shintsu had the right to execute the representative of another class who did not show proper respect. A samurai offended by anything could be killed on the spot and without a trial, even for a slanting glance, and the cases were so widespread that they caused no surprise among ordinary robots. Any Japanese who bore the title of samurai was a true warrior, and the shogun and our Shintsu were brought up in the same way. They were read from childhood legends about samurai and beaten Buddhist indifference to death and erected a real cult of bravery and courage, and also unconditional obedience to their master. In the past, before the samurai became a separate caste, in fact they were feudal lords. There was a wealthy lord who ruled over 1,000 peasants on his estate. But this lord, at the first call of his master, put on armor and forgot about his power and went to battle. It's a bit like medieval Europe with its vassals, isn't it? Of course, a common man could not become a samurai to get the title required, not only to be born into a family belonging to the estate, but also to go through severe trials. For example, our Shintsu father at one time ordered to spend a few nights in the cemetery to strengthen the courage and spirit, and also constantly took the boy with him to public executions and night inspection of the severed heads of criminals, and this is an obligatory stage. The young samurai must leave his mark on the heads to prove that he has been here and passed the training stage. Shintsu, like thousands of future samurai, were starved, forced to walk barefoot in the snow and work 24 hours without sleep. It was believed that this hardened the spirit and fostered humility. But the main thing that distinguished all samurai was the unquestioning fulfillment of Bushido, the code of rules and norms of Japanese warriors. People often compare it to the code of the knights, and that's a mistake. The knight's code was rather unwritten, and the postulates are often opposite. For example, to attack the enemy unexpectedly from the back for samurai was a common thing, vedbi the main victory. But at the same time, any knight would consider it an insult. Of course, Bushido was violated, and the tale that any violator committed suicide is pure myth. In such a case, samurai would quickly disappear as a species. Show suicides are few and far between, and more often than not, the samurai simply lost respect. Our Shintsu is a good guy and did not violate Bushido. Does that mean he is protected from possible suicide? According to the code, Shintsu's life belonged to the daimyo, and in case he was killed and there were no commands from the shogun, all daimyo samurai committed ritual suicide, but these cases were rare. The daimyo died except in battle with his army, so Shintsu is generally insured against sudden death. But at what expense he lives his life? Here is bad news. There is no point in counting how much rice Shingzi could buy with his salary, for Shintsu himself received his salary in rice. In spite of the fact that in Japan of that period there were gold and silver coins, most of the salaries and other payments were made with rice. Some provinces accepted some money in some other provinces, so rice was a kind of currency with a basic measure called koku. It was understood that 1 koku is the amount of rice on which a person could live live a year. One koku, for example, weighed 150 kilograms or 400 grams of rice a day. Not too much, is not it? By the way, this measure quietly operates in Japan, and in modern times, right now, it is equated to 180 liters. But not everything is so bad. Our Shintsu, as an ordinary warrior Ashigaru, received about 20 to 30 koku a year. The income of his daimyo could reach up to 1,000,000 koku a year. And more fortunate than Shintsu samurai included in the administration of the daimyo received somewhere around 100 koku. Let's try to translate everything into money, which, as we have already mentioned, were too different, and samurai themselves chose what to use and what to do with them. Let's take the most popular coin that was issued by the main house of Tokugawa. It was called oban, and in 1600 one oban equaled somewhere around 30-40 koku. So roughly rounding up, Shintsu earned 1 oban a year. By the way, many of us are familiar with oban, as a reference to it is in the head of the Pokemon Meowth in the legendary anime. The real oban was exactly this shape. In Shintsu, it is 1 is 10 koban or ryo, 2 varieties of smaller coins. Fortunately, we have a document listing the price of that era in ryo. Let's remember that Shintsu possesses 10 a year, and look at what could be bought with 1 ryo. The list is amazing. 750 trips to the bath, 214 trips to the barber, 158 watermelons, 278 books, 30 nights in a hotel, or 43 liters of sake. Also, 1 ryo is 1,500 dongo on a skewer, 140 kilograms of miso, or 250 trips to the theater. Even if we are wrong, and in fact Shintsu received half as much, it still comes out that in a month he could buy 150 pairs of sandals in general. It is logical, keeping in mind that our guy though is in the lowest rank but all samurai, and they were supposed to train at least 4 hours a day and be constantly trimmed, well groomed, and smelling nice. Bushido means that the samurai must be an example to all, so the cost of beauty Shintsu incurred decent. If it's all so great, where did the Ronin from the Keanu Reeves movie come from? Literally, Ronin means samurai without a master. That is contrary to the very essence of Bushido personality. In Ronin turned into a Ronin regardless of the reasons. Someone's master was killed, someone's obonkrutruvania and could not pay, and someone himself sent to hell suzeraina becoming free. Though Bushido does not allow such a possibility in the real world, rarely all happens as on paper. As a result, the government even led a special rite of 7 leaves and 8 ages that freedom-loving samurai periodically could leave the master and return. If our Shintsu once loses the master, then turn into a Ronin, and it is not a happy fate. Other samurai hate them, and in many ways even envy. Ronin always subjected to persecution and made up about them stories exposing cannibals. But most often Ronin become bounty hunters, mercenaries, or even merchants. No one prevented the guys to go into business, but most of them did not leave the path of the samurai. Is about this. Tell the movie, 47. Ronin based on a true story. In 1701, Daimyo Osana was sentenced to seppuku for attacking the samurai Kira, who was close to the shogun, and as a result, 47 subordinates of the daimyo, like our Shintsu, suddenly turned into Ronins. The situation was non-standard, and it was foolish to ask the guys to commit ritual suicide, so they were nailed, and the newly minted Ronin, on the contrary, doused with Bushido, and decided to organize a ritual and legal revenge for the master. The guys put to sleep the vigilance of Kira, pretending that drunk, married, and in general happy to live Ronin, and themselves on the contrary planned revenge, which was successfully carried out in 1703. As a result, Shogun waited for a stalemate situation. On the one hand, Ronin killed his closest for what is supposed to be the death penalty, and on the other, they followed the code of Bushido to the end for what were adored by the common people. In the end, Shogun allowed the guys to commit ritual suicide, leaving alive only the youngest. But the fate of most samurai was not so romantic. Feudal wars were raging, the villages were attacked by violent Ronin, and neighbors in the person of Koreans and Chinese periodically gave heat. Most often the samurai died in battle, which was considered an honor for him. The percentage of deaths was not so great, because as we have already mentioned, any samurai was perfectly prepared for everything warrior who, regardless of the position, continued training. The life of our Shintsu would have been sweet, but compared to some historical epochs he lived quite well. And we will live great if you give the video a like and suggest other warriors to deal with in the comments. See you later, friends.